Previously on World History and Geography.
For over 2,000 years, dynasties dominated China. The final Chinese dynasty, called the Qing, ended in 1911, and China entered decades of turmoil, including the start of a civil war and occupation by the Japanese in World War II. With the defeat of the Japanese, then the expulsion of the nationalists, no, not the nationals, the nationalists. They went to Taiwan, ending the Civil War in 1949. Mao Zedong and the Communists, with the backing of the peasant masses, became rulers of the People's Republic of China.
And now, our feature presentation.
Mao believed that peasant equality, revolutionary spirit, and hard work were all that was needed to improve the Chinese economy. However, lack of modern technology, along with poor economic policy, damaged Chinese efforts to increase agricultural and industrial output. When some Chinese communists wanted to modernize the economy, Mao began the Cultural Revolution in 1966 to cleanse China of anti-revolutionary influences. Instead of saving radical communism, however, the Cultural Revolution turned many people against it. In the early 1970s, China entered another moderate period under the direction of Zhou Enlai. In the early 1960s, China had split with the Soviet Union over the leadership of world communism. In addition, China displayed hostility toward the United States because of U.S. support for the government on Taiwan. But in 1971, Zhou startled the world by inviting an American table tennis team to tour China. By the way, table tennis is ping pong. The U.S. team was led by a Vietnam veteran by the name of Forrest Gump, right? Isn't that right? Well, it was the first visit by an American group to China since 1949. Zhou saw the USSR as the greater threat and wished to improve relations with the Soviet's enemy, the U.S. This ping-pong diplomacy began a new era in Chinese-American relations. In 1971, the United States reversed its policy and endorsed UN membership for the People's Republic of China. The next year, President Nixon
Sock it to me
made a state visit to China. He met with Mao and Zhou. The three leaders agreed to begin cultural exchanges and a limited amount of trade. In 1979, the United States and China established diplomatic relations. Zhou Enlai and then Mao Zedong died in 1976, leaving a poor and isolated China behind. Shortly afterward, moderates took control of the Communist Party. They jailed many of the radicals who had led the Cultural Revolution. By 1980, Deng Xiaoping had emerged as the most powerful leader in China. He was the last of the old revolutionaries who had ruled China since 1949. Deng was even the first Chinese leader to ever visit the United States. Well, he just fit right in. To alleviate social, economic, and environmental problems caused by the billion people living in China in 1979, the Chinese government began the one-child policy for a large portion of Chinese families. By only allowing one child to be born per set of parents, China has managed to reduce the growth rate and even relax the policy in many areas. Although a lifelong communist, Deng Xiaoping boldly supported moderate economic policies. Unlike Mao, he was willing to use capitalist ideas to help China's economy. He embraced a set of goals known as the Four Modernizations. These called for progress in agriculture, industry, defense, and science and technology. Deng launched an ambitious program of economic reforms, which led to a 50% increase in farm production and the start of private businesses operating in China. Deng's economic policies produced striking changes in Chinese life. As incomes increased, people began to buy appliances and televisions. Chinese youth now wore stylish clothes and listened to Western music. Gleaming hotels filled with foreign tourists symbolized China's new policy of openness. Deng's economic reforms produced a number of unexpected problems. As living standards improved, the gap between the rich and the poor widened. Increasingly, the public believed that party officials profited from their positions. Furthermore, the new policies admitted not only Western investments and tourists, but also Western political ideas. Increasing numbers of Chinese students studied abroad and learned about the West. In Deng's view, the benefits of opening the economy exceeded the risks. Nevertheless, as Chinese students learned more about democracy, they began to question China's lack of political freedom. In 1989, students sparked a popular uprising that stunned China's leaders. In the spring of that year, more than 100,000 students occupied Tiananmen Square, a huge public space in the heart of Beijing. The students mounted a protest for democracy, and many students called for Deng Xiaoping to resign. The protest spread to workers and others. Instead of considering political reform, the government declared martial law. Eventually, 100,000 troops surrounded Beijing. Although many students left the square after martial law was declared, about 5,000 chose to remain and continue their protest. The students revived their spirits by defiantly erecting a 33-foot statue that they named the Goddess of Democracy. On June 4, 1989, the standoff came to an end. Thousands of heavily armed soldiers stormed Tiananmen Square. Tanks smashed through barricades. Soldiers sprayed gunfire into the crowds of frightened students. They also attacked protesters elsewhere in Beijing. The assault killed hundreds and wounded thousands, and the fate of others is unknown, like the tank man, who stood in front of a column of tanks in Beijing. the day after the violent dispersal of the crowds in Tiananmen Square. The brutal repression of the pro-democracy movement left Deng firmly in control of China. Although Deng moved out of the limelight in 1995, he remained China's leader. In February 1997, after a long illness, Deng Xiaoping died. The Chinese leaders since have continued Deng's economic reforms, but China illustrates that liberal reforms in one area, such as the economy, may not lead immediately to political reforms. Soon after Deng Xiaoping's death, Great Britain handed Hong Kong, the thriving business center and British colony on the southeastern coast of China, over to China's communist government, ending 155 years of colonial rule. As part of the transfer, China promised to respect Hong Kong's economic system and political liberties for 50 years. In the year 2000, the U.S. Congress voted to normalize trade with China. Supporters of such a move argued that the best way to prompt political change in China is through greater engagement rather than isolation. What are those things? Oh, they're the mascots of the Beijing Olympics. When China hosted the 2008 Summer Olympics in Beijing, the world saw a much different People's Republic of China than Mao Zedong began in 1949. Where will China go next? We'll just have to wait and see.
Sock it to me.